Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to build on what Senator Ernst was talking about, one of the issues that I've raised over and over and over again here is that we sit thinking that only the federal government actually regulates or passes laws, and there are state and local codes and ordinances, and there are state laws and state regulations, and frequently those regulations may duplicate what you're attempting to do. They may in fact conflict with what you're attempting to do. And as part of this retrospective review, one of the questions I have is, have any of your agencies looked at state regulation, looked at local regulation or tribal regulation and ordinances to determine whether in fact we're keeping on the burden and finding inconsistencies in regulation? And I'll give it to anybody who wants to take it. I'm looking at you, EPA.
Then I guess I'll take it. I think certainly we are in regular communications with states, particularly. In many EPA programs, they are actually our co-regulators, so we have a very close working relationship with them. In addition to regularly meeting with not only states, but also the Conference of Mayors or the Association of Counties and other groups that represent state and local governments to
I think TSCA would be a great example there, where regulation in some states would be either more stringent than what you provide, and so complying with both sets of regulations may not actually advance public health. It may only create additional burden. And so I don't want to get into individual regulations. I just want to at least raise this issue, and certainly for the Department of Labor, many of the, and not to pick on the Department of Labor, but many of the burdens that we hear frequently are reporting burdens from the employer standpoint, whether it's wage and hour things, whether it is in fact safety issues, whether it's reports that need to be filed regarding salary payments. And so a lot of those may in fact be inconsistent with what is state regulation. Have you ever at the Department of Labor looked at state regulation in conjunction with the retrospective review?
Thank you for that question, and I think we would agree on the importance of ensuring that we're engaging kind of the broad community, including our state regulators. To the best of my knowledge, we have not done a cumulative survey state by state of the regulations, and I would be concerned if we did it, it would be outdated, potentially a month later. But that said, I think if there's particular examples of burden that you're hearing with regard to the reporting requirements, we would love to hear that as well, because I think one of the areas that we're pushing our agencies to think more creatively about is how to take advantage of technological advances, minimize reporting and burden requirements, think a little more out of the box, ask questions about, is the data necessary to receive on an X time schedule. So
yeah, let me give you an example. Davis-Bacon. Do you guys take the reports on Davis-Bacon wages? So I have a contractor, someone who has a federal is part of a federal contract. What happens to him is the project is stalled out, right? And they're just waiting for additional funding, or they're waiting for additional permits. And every week, I think you require reporting every week, he's filing a report saying nothing's changed. Now, I think that's kind of silly. A weekly reporting on your wages when you aren't paying any wages, but the project's ongoing. There's a great example, it seems to me, of record keeping where you have, people are willing to give you the data, but to require it when nothing's changed and the project's not going forward doesn't seem to be a very effective use. And I just raised that because you said, give me a for instance. There's a for instance. I think we can't think about this in a vacuum. We cannot look at what we do in Washington, D.C. and think that that's the entire universe of how we regulate industries and how we protect public safety and health. And so I just want to put this on the table. The you all have come up with some pretty good stories of savings, time savings, and we're grateful for that. But I think we need to quantify those. We need to make sure that we maybe have a second pair of eyes. And so this committee not only advanced this idea, but currently considering in the full committee is a provision which would create a commission, not just, just this executive order, but actually a commission that would advance, kind of review of retrospective review, get a better handle maybe on what Senator Ernst is talking about, which is across agencies taking a look at it. What would be your opinion of a review panel established for analysis on retrospective review? And we'll start with you, Ms. Klein.
Well, thank you for that question. I think that's a really interesting idea, and I think we would welcome outside expertise on how to better quantify the relative costs and benefits, the methodologies that would best be used to do that kind of analysis. Obviously, a lot of what we do is subject to anecdotal evidence and rhetoric about the relative costs and benefits about those regulations. And so I think having an outside commission that would provide us with expertise is an interesting idea, and one we would welcome working with you on it and how best to move forward.
What about USDA?
Well, I would just say that that's a policy question that's currently under review at USDA about the particular proposal, but I just want to reiterate that one of the foundations of our regulatory review process is robust and constant stakeholder involvement. USDA has a whole series of advisory committees. We have a whole series of technical industry boards. We have constant communications with our industry where we get this feedback, where we get stakeholder involvement and input on our practices, on data availability, and that contribute to our ensuring that our rules are the most effective and efficient. I think USDA has been
and we certainly wouldn't want to replace any of that. We'd want to take a look at kind of a broader, maybe a mile-high view as opposed to getting down in the weeds so that we can look at the whole regulatory environment. Department of Labor.
Thank you, and I share the view that that's an interesting idea for consideration. At the department, we also have a wide range of advisory councils, welcome the input from experts. So we would want to make sure that anything, I think, would be compatible with that and provided the flexibility that we would need to be able to look across all of our regulations. It also seems like that may be an appropriate question for OMB and OIRA that has the perspective across all of our agencies.
Thank you.
I think a key consideration for EPA would be to retain some flexibility in how the retrospective reviews are prioritized. As circumstances change and we get new ideas come through the door, some of those reviews might relate back to ongoing agency actions or be particularly timely. So in addition to being responsive to stakeholder feedback, retaining the discretion to prioritize the reviews has been a very useful and important thing for us.
Thank you for your insightful comments. I'm sure as we open this up, we'll get into further dialogue about this idea. And I think they're pro-common sense. I think most people can say, look, do we want safe food? Absolutely. Do we want to be able to track when there's an E. coli breakout? You bet. Do we want to make sure that we don't have human slavery and that people are getting paid what they're required to get paid under federal law? You bet. Do we want the tribes to have access to systems and rights of way so that they can not flare their important natural gas? Yeah. I mean, and so all of these regulations are critically important or we wouldn't be here. And many of the regulations that you all have promulgated, we've mandated. I mean, that's the dirty little secret here, is that we blame the regulator, but a lot of what the regulation is basically trying to be in compliance with our laws. I have an issue that I want to raise about resources, and you guys have come up with some good examples, saving lots of money and lots of time by engaging in retrospective review, and maybe you're reaching for the low-hanging fruit. But if we go back and take a look at what we would be, take a look at your examples and say, with more resources, we could actually save more money. We could actually do, kind of a Manhattan Project, for lack of a better example, for regulatory reform, for regulatory review, and actually dig down, get it done, get it cleaned up so that going forward, in the bill that we've introduced would require major rules going forward have a set of retrospective, kind of analysis that's subject to comment and finality with finalizing the rule. But it seems to me that you're hamstrung somewhat by the requirements of moving ahead with the regulatory responsibilities that you have to either adjust existing rules in the case of the new Farm Bill or to write new rules in the case of new regulations or new laws passed by Congress. Just from your example, and it's kind of fun to have people who actually do this work, who go to work. And a lot of times we have your bosses here, and where they're all very bright and very enlightened, they don't do what you do every day. And so could you give me just an idea of if we were able to do a project like that, where we really, both Congress and the executive branch, setting out some baselines, not ignoring the structures you already have, which you guys have been pretty clear that you have a robust group of stakeholders behind you who you participate with. But could you give me an idea of what more we could do in a shorter period of time with some additional resources and better collaboration with Congress? I start with you, Elizabeth, if you don't mind.
Sure, thank you. I have been, part of what we've done over the past couple of months is try and get better numbers on what kind of regulatory staff we have in each of our bureaus. It's actually quite small. When I started to look at some of the numbers, we have folks who are doing double duty, so their full-time job is not just writing regulations. But when you look at a bureau like the Bureau of Land Management that has probably 10 or so staff who are full-time on regulations, and that's an agency that's 10,000 people, and they're down to one economist. It's just not their function. They focus on petroleum engineers. They want to focus on inspection and enforcement. They want to focus on making sure that energy is being developed safely and responsibly. And so we have it's been an ongoing issue with the department that we do have regulations on the books that are over 30 years old and have not kept pace with current industry standards, and that's part of been.
So you would agree some additional resources and maybe a big kind of oversight project from the standpoint of Congress, not in the I gotcha range, but let's work together to improve this could be helpful.
I mean, we're sincere in saying that when folks are identifying areas of improvement and regulations where, there's 73 pages of a form that they don't need to be filling out, I mean, we want to hear that. The stuff that we've identified on our for retrospective review, I think, like the rights-of-way regulations in Indian country, this is where our focus has been, on the stuff that's really old and needs to be modernized.
I would point out, look at USDA. When did we pass the Farm Bill? It was February or March of 2014? Yeah, and it's signed by the president, and you're pretty much fully implemented right now.
That's correct.
With regulation. And so, there is a process, for not delaying. 2 years seems to me on some of these rules would be way outside what my expectation would be, given that they're common sense and people would not have a lot of criticism. I mean, you wouldn't get comment other than good for you.
Sure,
right?
and the equivalent to USDA for the Department of Labor would be our Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA, which we're in the process of moving as expeditiously as possible to change and update the regulations in response to the statutorily passed, the bipartisan bill that Congress passed and gave us to implement. So I think that is a hefty rulemaking. There are ways that we can move things as quickly as possible, but they come at a cost potentially of other priorities. So just as USDA is focusing on the Farm Bill, the department and our agency is focusing very much on that, but it may mean that something else is not going to be moving at that time.
I just want to thank you. This has been very helpful as we kind of move forward with our ideas. I personally believe that there is some advantage to a collaboration between Congress looking at kind of a commission-styled retrospective review, trying to get some kind of normalization, because each one of you have described a process that's different within your agencies. So even though there may be broad policy guidelines, the process is different. There may be things that we think should be included, good best practices that we've heard here that we think would benefit other agencies. You may not have enough resources to do those. And so, you know, I look forward to an ongoing discussion about this and trying to figure out what's the low-hanging fruit that once we are able to do it, we can say, we're listening to the American public about these burdens, that we are participating together, we're the adults in the room, they're our bosses, and we're going to respond to these concerns without jeopardizing safety for food, or without jeopardizing the quality of our air, without jeopardizing safe workplaces. You know, all the major missions that you have. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.